guys, and welcome to the cutting room. Yep, this is where I have been down a hole for the last week editing the first episode of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, the podcast. So the first episode, of course, we had to take it back to its inspo, and that was of course the book of the same name, Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, by the authors Bill Brewster and Frank Broughton. And so of course we had to have them on as the first episode, and they go into how they made this encyclopedia of dance music without the internet. I mean, I can't imagine that. Just think about that for a second. Yeah, how did you create this thing with so much information and so much knowledge? It must have taken ages. Well, you will find out in the episode. And then they also go and talk about how they got into DJing, and also some really great advice for people wanting to get into the industry. So here we are, the first episode. Some of the footage is a little bit different to the footage that you will see in episodes to come, and that is because I had to chase the videographer for better footage, but I didn't get it. So I've had to make do with what I've got. Anyway, this is the first episode of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, the podcast, with our first guests, authors Bill Brewster and Frank Broughton. Enjoy. Welcome to Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, the podcast. We're here to talk about the music industry from the DJ's perspective. On today's show, we have our guests whose book introduced the history of dance music to the masses. I'm so honoured and excited to have you guys on today. It is Bill Brewster and Frank Broughton of the book of the same name, Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. Thank you so much for coming on today, guys.
Pleasure, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Oh, of course. I mean, there's so much in this book that I just want to try and maybe just skim off the top, and we've only got a small bit of time today. But before we get into it, let's talk about you guys. So you are writers, you are DJs, and you first wrote this book 23 years ago. And
25 years ago.
Oh, my,
actually.
25 now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it came out in 1999.
Oh my gosh, time flies. So, I mean, let's start why you wanted to do it. Was it a case of realising, hey, DJs don't have a voice? What made you think, hey, let's write a book about DJs and the history of dance music?
I think, back then, music books, music literature were very sort of concentrated on rock and roll and that kind of history, and the Beatles, the hundreds of books about the Beatles and the Stones and Bob Dylan. And there are very, very few books about any kind of dance music. And we probably collected a lot of them even then. And we were both writing for Mix Mag and DJ Mag and various other magazines. But yeah, when it came out, there'd been Matthew Collins' book, Altered State, which was the first brilliant book about acid house and the cultural revolution that brought. Cheryl Garrett, who was editor of The Face, she was writing a similar thing from a kind of much more personal perspective. So she was writing that, which came out just after ours, just after or just before, yeah. So, but apart from that, there was David Toop's book about hip hop, which came out in the 80s, and there were various very obscure little books about things, but no one had really written much about dance music at all. And we wanted to write about disco because we both lived in New York, and we thought the disco was amazing with all these great stories and characters, and it just sounded like such a hedonistic time. So we pitched the idea of writing a book about disco, and our publisher, Doug Young, decided, he's like, well, hang on a minute, no one's written the whole story of DJs, the history of the DJ, why don't you do that? So that expanded it into this... Exactly, so we just we got quite megalomaniac, didn't we?
Yeah, we decided to write a book that was so thick it needed wheels, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and then, so I guess at the time were you DJing as well, or mainly just writing?
Bill was DJing, I wasn't really.
I was DJing. I mean, we felt like we were insiders trying to write it from a sort of insider perspective, I guess.
Okay.
We were participants. We were going out clubbing all the time. I was DJing semi-regularly then.
And were you DJing disco or?
I was playing a lot of different things,
Okay.
like house music, some disco, mixing it up really. Yeah, we kind of approached it from the point of view of being involved in it ourselves, being intimately involved in it. We'd both been writing for Mixmag for several years by the time we came to write the book. And we sort of met through Mixmag really, because I moved over to New York to run DMC's office in DMC with the parent company of Mixmag, and Frank was one of Mixmag's writers. So
I thought you said run DMC's office. I was like, that would be a different kind of.
That was around the corner.
Yeah, right.
DMC as in the ones that organise the mix battles and stuff like that. So
Okay.
and Frank came in to introduce himself into the office, so I was basically his new boss. So
How long did that go on for? How long were you guys working together?
I don't know. I mean, I was there before and after you, but you were there a couple of years,
He
weren't
lived there
you?
longer than me. I only
Okay.
lived there 2 years.
Okay.
So yeah, 2 years.
So you're saying you're playing a lot of house music. What would you say your first record was that you ever like? What got you into music and made you think, oh, I want to be a part of this?
The first record that I bought that made me think I want to be in music, I honestly couldn't tell you. I could tell you the first record I ever bought was Only the Fastest Milkman in the West by Benny Hill. but that certainly
That
wasn't anything that inspired me to get involved in music.
Yeah, what was that for? Just the.
I don't know. I had a weakness for comedy records when I was 10.
Was it like associated with the program? Because obviously we all know that.
No, it was just a novelty record, and I had a real I'd buy records by the Goons and people like that. So the idea of being able to work in music was so remote to me when I left school and all of that kind of stuff. So I wasn't involved in music in any way for quite a few years. I think I started a post-punk band in 1981. Basically,
Nice.
that was the first time I'd got involved in music.
Okay.
And I was very inspired by punk rock because it was one of those styles of music where you thought suddenly you don't have to have very much talent to have a go.
Okay.
And I certainly didn't have much talent. So
were you? Were you on the guitar? Were you singing?
I was the singer.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I'm a 20-year-old megalomaniac seeking pop stardom, but failing miserably. But then I started to get more into electronic music and dance music in the early 80s through bands like A Certain Ratio and 23 Skidoo, bands like that were kind of really inspiring me, and then got more and more into dance music as the 80s wore on. And then when Acid House happened, that was it really. I just kind of threw my lot in with that and gave up on indie bands and rock and roll.
I think I probably would it's one of the places I'd love to go back to, is like one of the raves in the 90s. But before we get on to that, what about yourself? What would you say was the first record you brought?
The first record I bought was Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep by Middle of the Road. I think my grandma helped me choose it probably, but that was I was very young, single figures. I think sort of getting into music in a more serious way probably happened around 11, 12, I think, and that again it was punk, which was the catalyst. I'm a bit younger than Bill, but so I kind of felt a bit young for punk. It sort of happened in London and passed me by. But I bought a load of singles off my friend's older brother. So I bought like about 12 punk singles, and they were kind of like probably classics of the time, like Buzzcocks or Orgasm Addict and I don't know, Public Image. So it's like post-punk, Susie and the Banshees. And that was sort of the core of my music taste as it started forming, as I started caring about music. It was very much that sort of punk explosion. And I think, Bill hit the nail on the head. It's like it was such an important moment in music because it suddenly was like anyone can have a go. And there was this brilliant music just made experimentally because everyone was like, oh, let's have a go with synthesizers, let's have a go with rhythms, let's have a go with trying to be a bit Latin or, so that whole period kind of after punk was kind of like just a sort of very brief thing. And then suddenly there's this amazing explosion of music, and I was into a lot of that, I guess.
Yeah, what would you say that came from? Because this was the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So, did that come from, do you think, the community that was that was kind of came together in the 70s from disco, then started moving into house music? Or do you think that was something that, because I know there's been that kind of, we were very influenced by the US in music, of course, but then obviously the UK kind of really took some of it and ran with it and made their own scenes?
Well, I think there were a few things happening. First of all, there was access to affordable equipment.
Right.
Was a big thing. So you started to get the first affordable drum machine. I can't remember when it came out exactly, but it would have been around 1981. Was the Dr. Rhythm by Boss. I think it was Dr. Rhythm 55 or something like that. And it was the first. It was like 50 quid. It was quite a lot of money then, but not unaffordably expensive. And you could program your own rhythms on it. Prior to that, a lot of the drum machines have just had set rhythms that you could use. So there were a lot of things coming onto the market. Casio had these little monotone synths that came out. There was like a VL tone, which was literally looked like a stylophone, but you could actually play on it. And The Fall used it on a couple of their tracks. So there was equipment being released that was affordable. And I think people would just, after having a go with punk rock, were just all going off in different directions, whether it's jazz or reggae or dub or disco or funk or whatever, and just experimenting with things. And I think that's where, and also in the US you had disco, the post-disco period, the avant-garde jazz scene, and then hip-hop, which was going to be turned into a massive thing. And that really blossomed in the 1980s, and that was huge in the UK as well. Loads of my friends would learning how to body pop on bits of lino in their mum's kitchen. You didn't get involved? I unfortunately was not live enough to even attempt.
You remain unpopped.
I'm unpopped completely.
And what about yourself? Do you think do you think the UK scene was, well, when obviously you're talking about punk, but was that straight out of the US, or was that something that maybe the UK?
I think, there was, you have to understand, back then there was so little communication really. There was the music papers, the NME and things like that, and that was really where you got your information from.
The world before the internet.
Exactly, it's only very recent that's changed. I think, that period in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, it was just, disco, hip hop, the bubbling under of house and all this kind of stuff was all still happening and all happening at the same time. Music was just really sort of like this fertile melting pot. But I think it was, over here, it was about getting records and hearing records. So you'd hear American records, but you weren't necessarily seeing a lot of American bands unless they came over.
And you would hear that from just reading about it in different magazines, right? And just
Britain has always had this incredible music literature. Weekly. There were 4 weekly magazines about music on a very serious level. It was a stack. Every week you could get a stack of newspaper that thick that told you about what was happening in your scene. So I think, like no other country, probably, we were obsessed with music from everywhere. So that's a very big part of why Britain made a lot of great music.
And also, we didn't have access to music in the way that you get. Music's everywhere there, Spotify and everything. But in those days, you would read a review of an album by a critic, because apart from John Peel, you largely had no way of finding out about things. There weren't that many. Where I live, certainly, you could only get national stations, really, and a local station that never played music that was interesting. There wasn't even a record store in the town that I grew up in, so I used to hitchhike to Nottingham to go record shopping. So the access to music was quite poor, and that made the weekly newspapers so much more important. We used to really look forward to I think it came out on a Thursday, and you'd go looking straight away on a Thursday morning to see if it was in, because it was your lifeline to a world of music.
Yeah, I think I'd probably like to rewind back to getting kind of musical papers, because you've only really got a couple of them now. Everything else is online. Do you think that now that we have so much access to music, do you personally always listen to a whole album, or do you?
It's hard to do that. We live in a different culture now, and it's playlists instead of albums. It's hard to sit down, and I think, like anything, if there's loads of it, it becomes less valuable. And I think back when there was less music and it was much, much harder to get hold of things, you'd hear about something and you wouldn't be able to hear it for maybe several years before you track down a copy.
Right. And also second-hand records, if you weren't around when a record had been released, say it had been released in 1965 or something, it was pure luck if you found it. You would go in second-hand stores looking for things and you'd have a list, but I mean, you often had no idea of how to find things.
Well, wasn't that how one of the movements started? What was it? It wasn't House, I think it was just after House when they were... wasn't it hip-hop, where they were like...
Well, hip-hop, they were looking for breaks.
They
were looking
going
for
breaks.
breaks.
Just digging out great drum breaks in old jazz records and things,
but let me rewind back to disco, I guess. When people kind of, I guess, en masse think of disco now, it's got that kind of fad, a little bit naff, a bit ABBA-esque, and obviously, disco is the history of disco, isn't that? Thanks to books like your own, the history of disco. House music came from disco. Do you think that it's still got a bad rep now, or people trying to realise that it's?
I think maybe the older generation think of it as a bit cheesy, but I think most people under the age of like 50 or 40 don't really think that anymore. I think they appreciate how much amazing music came out of that period and how life-changing it was and how emancipatory it was for the gay community. Absolutely, and the black gay community in particular. So I mean, one of our aims when we wrote the first edition of that book was to kind of re-establish disco as kind of one of the core ingredients of modern dance music, really, and something that was incredibly important to the development of dance music. And we were really proud of the outcome of that book because it feels now that people do respect it in a way that they didn't used to. You've got a disco festival in Liverpool, there's a new one starting in the Republic of Ireland in Dublin, there's a disco festival in Brixton. None of these would have happened without our book, Tim Lawrence's book, and other people kind of defending disco, basically.
Yeah, I do feel that now, you definitely see that mix of kind of original disco being mixed with house. Even they're not. I know disco started house, but they're kind of. I feel like house is almost reviving disco a little bit more.
House is disco's revenge.
Yeah,
that's Frankie Knuckles' quote.
Yeah, I was just going to say I absolutely love that quote. And do you feel that most genres throughout dance music have this kind of wildly innovative era to start with, and then they kind of get taken by the masses, by the record labels, and then I guess dissipate into something that then actually the originators don't want to be a part of anymore?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's not so much that they don't want to be a part of, but often they get sidelined. I think, in writing the book, we wanted to find the people that were first, the originators, and especially, I mean, disco was about independent labels usually. Most of the big hits were on independent labels, and then when the majors started trying to do disco, they weren't quite as successful with it because they didn't have that kind of revolutionary spirit. I mean, it's interesting about disco. I think one of the phrases that introduces the disco chapter just says disco was revolution. And it's taken 20 years for the world to realise that actually disco in that period was a really massive social movement. It was actually, because it came from these black gay clubs generally, this very underground music had a massive influence on how society saw gay people, saw black people, and disco and the lyrics of those songs are really profound and philosophical when you listen to them. So yeah, we were on quite a mission to rehabilitate disco, and it's great. I mean, the BBC documentary recently got a lot of it right. They actually started off saying, yeah, disco was a revolution, but it's taken 20 years for people to realise that it wasn't just this sort of fluffy wedding music.
Well, no, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely something. It just came from communities and bringing the communities together. And I saw that is a great documentary. There's a part in it where Candy Stassen is talking about her song, and it was actually quite a sad song, but everyone was dancing to it because it didn't matter where you came from. Everyone just wanted to kind of dance and enjoy the music together, I guess. So the book, the revised version. So I read somewhere, it was, so you took out 20,000 words to put in 23,000 more.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was important to revise it?
It's been a long time since, as we said right at the start, it was 25 years ago when we wrote it, and the world has changed since then, and I think we wanted to sort of bring the language up to date a little bit. And also, when we wrote the first edition of the book, the internet didn't really exist in the way it does now as an incredible and endless source of information. The internet back then was hopeless for any kind of information.
It was mostly kittens.
Yeah, mainly kittens.
Oh, it's fine, it's totally fine.
There were very few kittens in that book. So we had to use old school methods, which meant going to libraries, looking through microfiche, looking at old magazines, and tracking people down and interviewing them, first person interviews.
Yeah.
But over the years, more and more information has started to bubble into the internet, and we were able to kind of go through the book and sense check it, go through and see. It took us I spent about 6 weeks just going through the book and making little notes as I went through. And then we asked a friend to go have a read through of it, and for kind of language and stuff like that. Is the language and the way that we describe things appropriate? We wanted to make it much more women friendly. It is a fact, unfortunately, that there are very women involved in the history of DJs going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, because women were excluded from so many places anyway. So we wanted to try and bring more women into the book and bring their stories as well, either as commentators or as innovators in their own scenes.
Yeah.
So there were a number of different things that we wanted to address with it, and we hadn't looked at it since we did a minor update in 2006, so that was like, by the time we started working on this, that would have been like 15 years previously.
Okay.
So
we just wanted, 25-year-old to be able to pick it off the shelf and it makes sense, not look like a kind of museum piece. I think that was the main thing, was that we didn't want to change the book because it is, it's seen as a classic, and it was very much the first of its kind to sort of say dance music deserves a history. But yeah, we wanted it to not feel that it was an artifact and it was kind of only worth studying if you're academic. We wanted it to live again. We'd updated it in the States, which the American update hadn't come out here, so we had a lot of stuff.
Is just is it just a different kind of language you would use there, or
slightly? We have always Americanized the books to make them work in the States. So some of the analogies and similes and things like that you might use, you might change, and obviously the American spellings are different.
But they were just I think they'd asked us to update it, and then the British publisher hadn't used the update, so we were sort of out of sync. So this edition was able to bring all of that extra stuff that we'd done, which was really, that was the hard work so we were talking about genres that hadn't existed when we'd written the book, talking about the evolution of grime, the evolution of, EDM as it's called now, and the sort of the crazy economic factors that brought that into play, and all those things. We were able to, that was back in 2006, wasn't it? So
I think it was later than that, actually. But
2010 anyway. We had a lot to bring to it.
We had a relationship with the original publisher of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, so we were sort of trapped in limbo in the UK, really. Whereas we've had a continuing relationship with our publisher in the States. They've published all of our books over there, so we'd maintained a reasonable relationship with them going right back to 2000 when they published the first one.
Right. Okay. Speaking of women in the music industry, there's a great quote in your book, and it is, "Gender has nothing to do with your ability to present music," and that is from the legend, the first lady of disco, would you say, Sharon White. As we know, sexism does live in the music industry. A new report recently showed that women from the Women Inequalities Commission showed that it is a boys' club. They recognise that, and that sexual harassment lives within the music industry, from the age-old troubles of, say, Jimmy Savile and, you know, up to, say, Tim Westwood. I mean, it's continuous. What do you think needs to be put in place to kind of acknowledge this, stop this, kind of prevent these type of things from happening, really?
Well,
Yeah.
information is a great thing. I mean, the statistics of the music industry, the wider music industry, is not just dance music, but if you look at who owns publishing,
Yeah.
men versus women, it's frightening. You know, the number of women who own publishing is very, you know, I think it's like 30% to 70% or something like that.
Yeah, I think also you mentioned the book, like, I think it's, what is it, like 18% of female writers, singer-songwriters female, so
Yeah,
18%,
yeah.
Which is insane.
Well, it's interesting actually. For this edition, DJ Paulette was really helpful because she's done a lot of research on wage inequality in
Right.
DJing and the wider music industry, and her book's just out now as well. And that's a brilliant. You know, she's obviously gone into those issues a lot more deeply than we have. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that will change it is just people knowing that it's unfair and people knowing that it should change and people being embarrassed about it. And people are doing that. I think, you know, if you look at club promoters, there are, you know, the right thinking club promoters are making sure they have 50-50 billing,
Yeah.
which is something we do at our party nights. And that kind of shaming, it's, you know, you almost got to shame the rest of the industry into following suit.
Yeah, and to kind of recognising that they can't carry on, I guess, like this. But do you think festivals now are still a bit of a boys' club? Why do you think it's kind of maybe so difficult to push through those barriers? Is it gatekeeping?
It's really hard to say. I think some of it is just older promoters who are entrenched in an older view of the industry.
Right.
And if maybe they're aiming their music at an older audience, maybe there simply weren't as many women active in that period, I suppose, would be one of their justifications. But I think when it comes to festivals like Glastonbury or whatever, I don't think anyone's got any excuse. You know, there are a lot of women.
Because the lineup gets. People buy their tickets for the lineup actually gets announced, don't they? So yeah.
But don't forget, Glastonbury is won by Emily Evis. So
yeah, that is. I mean, it is, and it is run by her. I think I've also heard that the different people run the different stages, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not franchised out exactly, but there are definitely different bookers for different stages.
Right. Yeah. Let's get back to kind of the origins of the DJ and how it's kind of moved on. So originally the DJ was just someone that put on background music, and then we kind of moved into the 90s of superstardom, and now it's kind of, you know, there's DJs, the DJ is still this kind of superstar that people want to be and aspire to be, but also on a plus side, I guess DJing is so accessible to everyone. Is that a good thing, or what are your thoughts?
Double-edged sword, really.
Yeah, I think so.
Most things.
Personally, I don't think that superstar DJs are really DJing when they're playing in a stadium, because that's not really what DJing is about. DJing is about playing in a room that's small enough for you to have this symbiotic relationship with the people on the dance floor, that you can see their faces, you can respond with each other and communicate with each other. That's a really key part of what being a DJ is all about. So if you're playing in a football stadium, you're performing, for sure, but are you really DJing? I don't think so. I don't think it's really got very much to do with DJing at all.
Well, I think a couple of them have said that they will happily just go out there and press play. That's what they kind of do.
And I think a lot of them have to, because the light show and what have you, the dancers, and you know, it's such a massive production now that they can't do anything different. They've got to say, well, we're going to play this and this and this and this. But yeah, to get philosophical about it, it's the difference between consuming something and being part of something. It's I think in a really good club, everyone's on the same wavelength, including the DJ, and that's what the DJ is. The DJ is part of the dance floor. It's a special member of the party. So this idea that they're so special you need to look at them isn't quite right.
Yeah.
It's kind of that's the moment that it changed, is when everyone started facing the same way and looking, because you should be with your friends and looking at your friends and hanging out and partying. And
I was going to mention actually, because I think Honey Dijon had said recently, let's kind of get the DJs hidden even. What do you kind of think of that? Because I feel like it's still exactly that. You don't want to be staring at the DJ, but to get them kind of still part of the atmosphere that they are creating, or do you think it should just be like it's just dancers, hide the DJ away type thing?
I don't know about hide them, but I mean, as a DJ, most right-thinking DJs will want to be on the same level as the crowd. Most right-thinking DJs will want to be somehow connected and in amongst the people. I think the people who like being on a pedestal have probably lost the point. You know, they're missing the point. But I don't know. You don't need to hide someone. It's like, you know, that's a bit weird.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with. I mean, personally, I don't like playing on stages. I always feel like I've been removed from the crowd a little bit. I'd much rather be on a similar level. But I'd be happy in a little box with a little slit in it, much more than actually being, you know, on a stage. I don't really enjoy that. I think because it always feels like you should be doing more things than you can actually do as a DJ. Do you know what I mean? Because you're on stage and you're like, don't look at this. There's nothing to see. Yeah,
it is weird, though, isn't it? People will just stand and not actually be dancing, but then maybe they're just in their own moment, in their own world.
She's right. I think, you know, she comes from you know, the old school proper parties. Chicago culture, and she knows Chicago and New York and the great parties. She's experienced those great parties, and she's absolutely right that, you know, there needs to be some kind of equality and some kind of communion.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go somewhere back to say like lockdown, when people were DJing live online and things like that, did you guys partake in anything like that?
Yeah, Bill did a lot of it, and then we did.
I did. It was kind of.
This is the weirdest thing. Thinking back now, like
it's extremely weird, but it sort of kept me sane, really, 100%. Being able to do it, even though it was sort of a bit surreal and a bit ridiculous. But I actually quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, people loved it because it was weird. They, you know, obviously had to stay in on their Friday night and they were dancing.
But there was that community because you had lots of people chatting. The chat was so important. It's like without a room full of dancers, you had people commenting and shouting and whooping, but it was written. And I think, you know, I mean, you got your NTS show. That must be the thing that keeps you excited about those moments. Like,
I mean, doing the NTS show is a little bit similar to doing those online streams because they've got a very active chat room and people respond to what you play and they chat amongst each other, and I really like that kind of the liveness of that, and that's with the absence of a dance floor, all of the kind of little comments coming in sort of were your equivalent of responding to a full dance floor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you know, going back to this kind of superstardom or aspiration, you know, the DJ was, like we've said before, someone that just kind of put on records, and now they're this, it's people want to have this as a type of job. Where do you think this kind of worship of the DJ came from? Like, you know, when you're at festivals and you're on the DJs are on the stage and people
you have to remember that DJs, I mean, in between just putting records on and being a superstar, there was a whole evolution of the craft where things, you know, the craft became really, you know, there were people who could do amazing things with music. So I think that is why the DJ became this kind of cult figure superstar, because these people were able to do amazing things with recorded music, and coupled with the explosion of house music and drugs and that all night dance till you drop kind of mentality, that's when people start going, oh my God, look, he's controlling my emotions. And all this. So I think over here, that was when it happened over here, was Acid House, was people realised that the DJ was giving them the most fun they'd ever had. And that happened a little bit earlier in the States, in the kind of the more underground clubs, of disco, really, where people realise that actually, you know, it is other people's music and they are just playing other people's music, but they're doing it in such an amazing way, and they're stringing these stories together with music, and they're beat matching, which was, you know, mind-blowing, the idea that the beat never changed. And so, you know, they in the States, they caught on to that whole thing a lot earlier than us. But I think that realisation that the DJ can dispense an awful lot of pleasure because they know music better than anyone else, and here, I bet you've never heard this, and this will blow your mind. That feeling of like giving the crowd that.
Absolutely, yeah. Give it something that they know, and then surprising them is always a good feeling. And as DJs, what do you think has been like your best moments?
Probably doing our own parties. We've been doing a party for 29 years now.
Right. Give it a shout out.
Yeah, Low Life. Yeah, we've been doing a party for 29 years, and some of the early ones, I mean, it's still brilliant now, but I think you do remember the early ones because they're the ones where you realise that you're kind of onto something, and we always kind of avoided over publicising them. They were always very much word of mouth, and especially the early ones. We literally told our mates and they told their mates, and we'd get 100 people come in, then it was 200, and then it was 500.
Great.
So those ones, I think the ones in Fortress are the ones that I perhaps remember most fondly because they were so anarchic, weren't they?
Yeah. Sweatbox. Yeah, they were amazing.
Is there any other time or place that you would want to go back to that you kind of like? For me, I wish I could go back to Studio 54 or something like that. Is there any other musical time that you think, oh, I wish I had experienced that?
Well, I'll meet you at Studio 54, but beforehand, I'm going to go to Paradise Garage.
Okay, okay, brilliant.
I would say mid to late 70s New York would be kind of nirvana really, because you catch all kinds of different things going on at the same time. The Mod Club and Danceteria, but also after hours places, Paradise Garage, Studio 54, the Saint. There would have just been a lot of different things going on that you could, that I'd love to have had the chance to experience.
And okay, so let's talk about records a bit more. So what would you say is your, I mean, it's to narrow it down, what would you say is your favourite record of all time? And let's not think about it too much. What is coming out there like straight at you right now, if you think about it?
Well, I mean, my favourite house record is 51 Days Paper Moon, which was a Dutch deep house record that came out in about 1994. It was released when Frank and I were living in New York, and it was a massive record in New York. In the UK, not so much. It just seemed to not do very much in the UK, but I've played that a lot over the years, and it's one that I keep coming back to. So I suppose in terms of dance music, that's one of my favourites.
Okay, what about yourself?
I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is to say "Love Is a Message," MFSB, because it's an astonishing record because it never ages.
Right.
It always sounds amazing.
Yeah. What about any guilty pleasures?
I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I don't feel guilty about any of the music that I like. And I've got records by Phil Collins and Leo Sayer that I play in clubs quite happily. So
nothing wrong with a bit of Phil Collins.
No, I mean I don't mind a bit of Phil. So yeah, I don't really feel guilty about any music that I like.
Okay.
I don't think people should feel guilty. You know, even if someone else might be sniffy about your musical taste, the great thing about music is it's just so subjective, isn't it?
Yeah. You can't be wrong.
Yeah.
You can't be wrong about what you like.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, I'm going to get into something really silly here.
Okay.
It's a quick fire round. You might have seen it over here. Okay, so let's go. Vinyl or digital?
Both.
Now digital.
What's your favourite BPM to play in?
122.
115.
Disco or rave?
Disco.
Disco.
Intimate or arena?
Intimate.
Open format or focused genre?
Open format.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you. And just a couple more bits, really. Who are you listening to at the moment?
Oh God, loads and loads of people. What I listen to at home is not really the same as what I listen to when I'm preparing for a gig, though. You know,
Okay.
kind of the last Little Yachty album I really like a lot, which is like a kind of a psychedelic hip hop record.
Bonkers, that is.
Yeah,
that's great.
The Jim album. Jim is James Barron from Crazy P. He did like a solo album that's kind of a bit West Coast rocky sounding.
Okay, Cool.
My girlfriend in particular is really into that, so I've heard that a lot over the last year.
The way.
But actually, in terms of stuff, I listen to a lot of playlists, and I'm desperately trying to think of tracks that I can pull out of those that I really like, but I can't. I'm terrible at remembering things like that.
What about yourself?
I'm worse. I can't remember the names of anything, so I'd have to bring some playlists in.
Yeah, there's you know, you were talking about someone doing something really different from what they usually do. Have you heard it's Super Shy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought
it's Tom Mish.
Yeah, I thought that was really different because he's usually guitar and he's gone down this whole kind of.
Yeah, he'd actually done vocals on a couple of dance tracks before that. Those are pretty good. The Super Shy album's not bad at all.
Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, what DJ advice would you give to people aspiring to be a DJ?
Throw your own party. Don't wait for someone to discover you. Do your own party. Find a little room, 100 people, get your mates to come along and start from there and build it up. No one is going to book you off the basis of a mixtape. You've got to build a crowd yourself, I think. Almost everybody that's built a career in dance music has done that. Yep. You know, they've built their own little party and made it bigger and bigger and bigger, and then started getting booking elsewhere. That's how I started getting booking for other places outside of Low Life was doing the part that me and Frank do.
Okay. And finally, what brings you joy?
A happy dance floor, a full happy dance floor. It's just the most intoxicating thing. It's better than drugs. And as a DJ, you're sort of constantly chasing that high of those incredible nights when everything goes perfectly. And every time it happens, you want more of it. And that's why you keep going out and you keep DJing. And it's a proper addiction.
Would you say the same?
Yeah, just people smiling, a room full of people smiling who couldn't have a better time. You know, that's just, you know, that's what we all live for. And I think that's the thing about parties is you always think, oh, the next one's going to be even more amazing. And yeah, putting on parties is really, really fun.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming in today. I have to say, this book really is like the first book that, you know, aspiring DJs read. It is the go-to. It is like the Bible for DJs. So last night, DJ Saved My Life. So the revised paperback edition is coming out.
July.
So make sure to get yourselves a copy. Thank you so much for coming in today, guys.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
Great. So that's it, guys. That was the first episode. The footage will get better, I promise. But yeah, these guys, they have so much musical knowledge. We only touched the surface. And I think, you know, if you are a person looking at getting into the industry or finding out more about the history of dance music, their book really is the place to go to start and to end. It's got so much. I really liked how they talked about the revision of the book and how that also includes a lot more information about the female DJs that were significant on the scene. And of course the revisions of things like Jimmy Savile, because, you know, he was obviously a person that was quite important in the music industry, but we all know what happened to him, or rather what he did to people. Anyway, we move. I hope you enjoyed it. There's much more to come, and be nice to me in the comments. Thanks so much. See you next time.